Namaste, Tashi Delek, and welcome back to The Man Who Stare at Mountains. In today's video, we need to talk about a topic which unfortunately confuses hundreds and thousands of Nepal travelers on a daily basis, and it just doesn't seem to get any better. The question, whether or not you need to hire a guide to go trekking in Nepal. Internet forums, platforms like Facebook, and basically all other forms of social media are flowing over with people who just can't find out what the actual regulations are. Information you might find online on certain websites regarding both guides and trekking permits are often outdated and sometimes even deliberately lying to you. I expected this issue would sort itself out over time, but in reality the chaos just seems to grow instead. Therefore, in this video I will tell you as clearly as possible for which treks you actually need to be with a licensed guide and which ones you can tackle solo. I'll also tell you what permits you need in each trekking region and where you can get them. And in order to protect you from any potential scams, I'll try my very best to explain how the current situation came to be in the first place so that you have a better idea about why all the misinformation, both random and deliberate, exist. First, here's a short disclaimer. For the scope of this video, we will focus on Nepal's popular tea house treks, not on really adventurous camping treks like, for example, in Dolpo or other remote regions. That said, here is how we will break the whole mess down. I'll get straight to the point and tell you which of the popular treks in Nepal require you to hire a guide and which ones don't. I'll start with the ones that do and then move over to the treks you can do without a guide. We then need to talk about the Langtang National Park separately, as its situation is a bit special as of spring 2025. Afterwards, I'll tell you which tickets and permits you need for the popular treks and also which ones you don't need. That is important because there are a number of people out there who would love to trick you into buying unnecessary paperwork from them. And talking about people who might try to trick you, I'll also do my best to explain why this whole confusion regarding guides and permits exists. So make sure you stick around to the end if you actually want to understand what the heck is going on. But as promised, for those of you in a hurry, we start off with the current situation on Nepal's beautiful trekking trails. As of spring 2025, you do need a guide for any trek inside or partially inside any of these restricted areas. Upper Mustang, which basically includes the whole area along the Kali Gandaki upstream from Kagbeni, Nar and Phu Valley just north of but not including the Annapurna circuit, the Gorkha Manaslu area including the famous Manaslu circuit, Tsum Valley north of Ganesh Himal, which you can also access through the Manaslu circuit, and the Kanchenjunga Himal including the treks to Kanchenjunga North and South Base Camp and the Kanchenjunga circuit. If you plan to trek through any of these areas as a foreigner, you need to be with a licensed guide. Side note, this is the same situation as during the last few decades. There has not been any recent change to it. Moving on to the treks you can do without a guide, just with your friends or even completely solo. These include all the popular treks in the Annapurna Himal, including the Annapurna circuit, Tilicha Lake, Annapurna Base Camp, Mardi Himal, Kopradanda, Muldai Viewpoint, Poon Hill, and so on. The Ruby Valley trek on the southern foothills of Ganesh Himal and the Tamang Heritage Trail east of Ganesh Himal. The Helambu region north of Kathmandu, the Roivaling trek east of Kathmandu, all treks in the Solukhumbu region including Paiki Peak, the Jiri or Shivalaya Tulukla trek, the Everest Base Camp trek, Gokyo trek, the Three Passes trek, the trek to and along the Hinku Valley up to the base of Mera Peak, the trek connecting the Khumbu to the Arun Valley, and the Makalu Base Camp trek. All these treks do currently, did for decades prior, and will most likely in the foreseeable future not require you to be with a guide. At this point you might be wondering why there are so many websites and articles saying different things, so bear with me. I'll try my very best to explain why this current confusion exists in just a moment. Before that though, we need to talk about another officially non-restricted area where the situation is currently less clear. The Langtang National Park, featuring the Langtang Valley Trek and the Gozang Kunda Trek including Laurebina Pass. As the area is not a restricted area, the mandatory guide requirement affecting all the restricted areas I mentioned before doesn't apply here. However, In early spring 2025, the Langtang National Park on its own announced it would no longer permit foreigners trekking without a guide. Since then, despite carefully and constantly scouring multiple forums and social media for it, I have not seen a single report of any trekker actually being sent back for not having a guide. However, I did come across several trekkers reporting that they had to be accompanied by a random local pretending to be their guide while they bought their national park ticket in the ticket office in Dunche. Such guide impersonators are reportedly waiting right in front of the ticket office, posing as guides for multiple different groups per day, while of course not having any credentials. As you can imagine, these acting services aren't free, which to me makes all of this sound like quite a blunt scam. Depending on if this situation is still going on when you get to Dunche, you might either try to be stubborn for long enough until they just sell you the ticket, or you can tell them you want to actually hike the Tamang Heritage Trail or the Ruby Valley Trek first, both also starting in Siap Rubesi and not or just barely within the Langtang National Park. You can also bite the bullet and haggle hard with a fake guide while playing along. Another option is to buy the Langtang National Park ticket at the tourist office in Kathmandu before you even set off to the area. So far, I have not come across anyone reporting problems with purchasing the ticket there. I also have yet to see any report of someone getting into serious trouble for not having a guide during the actual trek. But still, the situation in Langtang is not nearly as clear as in the other regions and can obviously change quickly. From all I can tell, it's still very much possible to trek Langtang solo, and to me the whole thing sounds like a setup for possible scams. Personally, I love the Langtang area and it's one of the most beautiful parts of the Himalaya. But in case you want to hike unguided and want to be 100% certain that you're allowed to do that, best choose a different region until things here get back to normal. After all, tea houses and lodges are complaining already about the sharp decline in the number of trekkers. Should you guys and girls watching this be able to confirm what I just summarized, or if you actually do run into problems accessing Langtang, please make sure to report in the comments below. Me, but more importantly others watching, will be very grateful for your updates. Since we already started talking about the Langtang National Park ticket, let's move on to tickets and permits. This video is mainly about whether guides are mandatory or not, but in the last few years many people spent more on paperwork than they needed to, so I figure I should make sure you know what you actually need and what not. Every national park or conservation area you enter requires you to buy the respective ticket for it, just like Langtang. For example, the Annapurna Conservation Area requires you to have the ACAP ticket, and the Sagarmatha National Park requires you to have a Sagarmatha National Park ticket, and so on. Simple as that. Most of these tickets are sold somewhere around the entrance of the most important road or trail into the area, as well as the tourist offices in Kathmandu and Pokhara. These tickets cost between 2,000 and 3,000 rupees, so about $15 to $25 per person. In restricted areas, you additionally need a trekking permit. But as I mentioned before, restricted areas also require you to go with a licensed guide anyway, and usually your guide or someone from the trekking agency you hire him through will get that permit for you. So basically, no matter if solo trekker or with a guide, you will never have to care for a trekking permit yourself. There is one small exception to that in the Khumbu region, which requires you to buy a so-called trek card. You will get to buy that on site between Lukla and Namche Bazaar. It's easy and straightforward to obtain, so don't worry about it before setting off. In summary, as a solo trekker, you only need to make sure to get the relevant national park or conservation area ticket either in the city before you set off or at the entrance of the park or area. Nothing more. In case you tried to research this yourself, you might have stumbled across the so-called TIMS card or TIMS permit. Long story short, you don't need it, you should forget about it as soon as possible, and you should ignore it anytime it comes up. And here is why. TIMS was originally a network of checkpoints where police officers and volunteering locals recorded the progression and whereabouts of foreign trekkers in case they would need to be found and rescued. This system never really worked well, got gradually abandoned, and is no longer in operation. The exact point of time varies by region, but the last TIMS checkpoints to close were the ones in the Annapurnas in early 2020. Since then, the TIMS system doesn't exist anymore, and as a result, you don't need to buy a TIMS card. Anyone telling you otherwise is probably trying to trick you. I could talk about TIMS all day, but it all comes down to what I said before. Forget it and ignore it. Short side note, trekking agencies still seem to be required to get a TIMS card for their clients for 1000 rupees. I am not completely sure why that is, since the checkposts are, of course also for organized groups, still closed. While I certainly have my theories on that, as well as an opinion, that's beyond the scope of this video. So let's move on. With regional tickets and permits out of the way, let's look at what created the confusion about TIMS and mandatory guides in the first place. In early 2023, an organization named TAAN, the Trekking Agency Association of Nepal, by the way the same organization who used to run the TIMS checkpoints, came forward to announce a so-called rule according to which trekking in Nepal without a guide would from April in the same year on be forbidden. This got picked up by many domestic and international social media communities, websites and news agencies and was quickly spread around the globe. However, most of the media picking up the story assumed that this was to be an actual law by the Nepalese government. In reality, it turned out to be nothing but a PR stunt made up to force foreign visitors to hire guides, which of course benefits the members of TAAN, the trekking agencies. This is also why probably most sources you come across call this a rule and not a law, because at no point in time it was expected to actually become law. Ironically, the so-called mandatory guide rule was allegedly planned to be enforced through the TIMS checkpoints, which by that point were already shut nationwide since multiple years or, depending on the region, even since decades. As you can imagine by now, none of this ever came into effect, and independent trekking continues without any issue. However, most of the articles written and issued in spring 2023 still linger around online, and some agencies and guides are still happy to spread the fairy tale of the mandatory guide to anyone not fully aware that they keep on beating a dead horse. And that's the reason why you find so much conflicting information on whether you need to hire a guide for a trek and what permits you need, and most importantly don't need before you set off. To summarize once more, regulations are mostly the same as before 2023, and actually pretty much the same as they were for the last decade or two. You don't need to get a TIMS card, you only need the respective regional area or park ticket. Besides, you only need a guide for restricted areas. You can trek solo in all unrestricted areas, with Langtang being somewhat of a question mark right now, as I explained before. Keep in mind though that this whole video was about whether you have to hire a guide, not whether or not you should. There are many reasons why hiring a guide could be an absolutely great idea, despite it might not be mandatory for your specific trek. If you want me to tell you all the pros and cons for trekking in Nepal with a guide, and maybe some practical tips on how to pick a reliable agency, just leave a short comment below. If that is an interesting topic for you guys, let me know and I'll get right to it. And in case this video was helpful for you, please leave a thumbs up so that other people can find it as well. It really helps with the algorithm. And if you get value from this channel and want to get more videos about trekking and traveling in Nepal, consider subscribing as well. And with that, thank you very much for watching and hopefully see you in the next one.